Good evening, everyone. My name is Dylan Ryder from the Johnson County Library Career and Finance Committee. Thanks for joining us this evening for this step-by-step through the FAFSA program. Now, our presenter tonight is Jason Anderson. Jason is a seasoned college consultant who is focused on affordability, student success, and financial common sense. Jason has an extensive and believe me, an extensive background, including roles as a higher ed instructor, entrepreneur, and professional college and career planning consultant. He's a certified public accountant in the state of Kansas, a certified financial planner, and he holds not one, but two master's degrees in business and education. So believe me, he is quite well versed in the FAFSA process. Now, for you all who are watching here, please put your comments and questions in the chat as they come to mind. Jason will be covering a lot of ground tonight, but we'll be sure to address each and every question following his presentation. Now, that's enough for me. Here's Jason.
All right, welcome everybody. Yeah, good to be back at Johnson County Library. I'm a Johnson County resident. My son might run through here. I've got kiddos on the loose, but yeah, big fan of Johnson County Library. I was just there a couple hours ago, and I'm excited to be back. So before we get started, I do have a disclaimer that I wanted to talk about. So I am full-time on the faculty at the University of Kansas. And so the University of Kansas wants me to tell you when I'm wearing my University of Kansas hat versus wearing my Grad Metrics hat, which is a side business that I run that helps people with college and student loan planning issues. And so today I'm wearing my Grad Metrics hat. So keep that in mind. What I'm saying doesn't reflect on KU. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we need a basic understanding of financial aid in order to start talking about the FAFSA, right? And so we're going to talk a little bit about financial aid. Then we're going to move on to student loans. And after that, we're going to talk about kind of some strategies to fill out the FAFSA. And we'll talk specifically about that in a step-by-step basis because the FAFSA has changed pretty significantly this year, as you might have heard. And we have a lot of changes that we've never seen before. Some of those are good, some of those are not so good. And you might have also heard that the FAFSA is opening up later than it ever has historically. And so we'll talk about all of those things as we go through this presentation. Okay, so let's start with financial aid. First off, why do you fill out the FAFSA? And by the way, there are a lot of misconceptions about the FAFSA. A lot of families, especially here in Johnson County, will say, hey, I make too much money. I don't need to fill out the FAFSA. Well, that's not true because not all financial aid requires financial need. And so you can get money that doesn't have to be paid back. We call that grants or scholarships. You can get that through the FAFSA. It does require, in many cases, financial need, but your school might be using the information that's been put into the FAFSA to allocate scholarships that are not based on financial need. And so it's good to fill it out. A lot of schools just frankly require it. They don't allow you an option to not do it if you want to apply for financial aid through the school. And so many families are kind of arm twisted into doing it. But even those that don't have to, in other words, a school doesn't force them to fill out the FAFSA, you might want to still fill it out. And why is that? Well, because you might get student loans. And student loans, of course, is money that you have to pay back over time. But federal student loans, loans that come from the FAFSA, have perks. They have things like loan forgiveness and even long-term loan forgiveness and an income-driven repayment plan. They have income-driven repayment plans. So many things that you won't see out there in the private space when it comes to student loans. And then, of course, there's other money for college, things like private scholarships. You don't have to fill out the FAFSA to get those, but they're a very small amount of the pie. So I have lots of families that come to me and they say, hey, should we be applying for tons of scholarships on private scholarship sites? And I say, yeah, I mean, you can, but it's certainly not a large portion of the funding pie. The majority of money for college comes from the government and from the institutions themselves. And so that's why we have to talk about the FAFSA when it comes to funding college. So again, need-based aid. This could be like the federal Pell Grant, money that doesn't have to be paid back. It could be the federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. It could also be money that has to be paid back, but subsidized. And so a direct subsidized loan is a loan that you can get from filling out the FAFSA. It's based on financial need. but essentially the government will pay for your interest while you're in school. Now you're eventually going to have to pay for that interest, okay? But while you're in school, the government picks up the check, so it makes your loan less expensive over time. And then you might also qualify for something called federal work study. This is where the government pays for a job for you to be on campus, and sometimes they're even off campus. But it tends to be like a minimum wage job that you can work on campus, and the government is funding that position. Then there's also aid that's not based on need. And so, again, to this idea that I believe everybody should fill out the FAFSA, regardless of how much money you make, it's because you can get money from the FAFSA and it can be a part of your entire funding strategy for college, even if you don't demonstrate financial need. In other words, you can make $1 million a year. And there's still some types of money that you could get from the FAFSA. So one of those options is a direct unsubsidized loan. So direct unsubsidized loans are just loans that you take out. Interest starts to accrue when you start to take it out. The government doesn't pick up the check this time, and it essentially help you pay for college. And we'll talk about the levels that your student will get. The other thing that I would say at this point is even though it's not subsidized, in one sense it kind of is. And so if your student was to go out and try to get a private student loan, the bank's going to look at them and they're going to say they don't have any income, they don't have a credit score. And so they're going to require a cosigner. They're also probably going to give above market interest rates. And in today's day and age, that can be a hefty interest rate because interest rates are rising. Plus, they're going to tag on that risk. And so it could be, 10, 12%, whatever it looks like. Well, the money that comes from the government, although it's not subsidized that the government's not paying for your interest, it is subsidized in that your student can take it out in their own name for below market interest rates. And so these still can be very good loans as a part of a package as to how you're going to fund college. Then Parent Plus loans. So if you've thought about taking out money on behalf of your child to pay for their college, it's in your name as a parent, but that's certainly an option, and it tends to be an option that many parents take, even though it is higher interest. We'll talk about that, higher fees. Then you could get things like the Teach Grant. And so the Teach Grant's free money. It could eventually convert to a loan if you don't meet the qualifications of the grant. But if you're going to be a teacher, this is free money the government offers you. And again, this is something that might be of interest to you depending on your major choice. So how much money can you get? Well, if we're talking about a Pell Grant or the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant or Teach Grant, you can see those numbers, those updated numbers on your slide. There's also the Iraq and Afghanistan Service Grant. There's direct subsidized loans, direct unsubsidized loans, and then those direct plus loans. So let's talk about the loans in particular because the other ones are pretty cut and dry. You don't have to pay that money back and you get it on a yearly basis. A lot of times, also Pell Grants are matched by a school, so you may even get more money than what's listed on the screen here. However, if you look at direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans, you can see that those amounts are capped. And so these are amounts of money that your student will be able to take out for their own education. And the government, especially at the undergraduate level, doesn't want students to take out tons and tons of debt. And so they actually cap what a student's able to take out. Whereas plus loans, either graduate plus loans, if you're going for a graduate degree, or parent plus loans on behalf of your child, actually don't have a cap. And so this is why when I said part of my business is doing student loan planning, I regularly meet with parents who've taken out hundreds of thousands of dollars on behalf of their children to fund college. And so it can get really scary really quick, especially at higher interest rates. But that's a little bit about what you might be able to get when you fill out the FAFSA. So when it comes to student loans, why do we need student loans? Again, I just kind of told you a scary story there. And a part of that is because college has gotten significantly more expensive over time. So I'm also a PhD student at Kansas State University. This is one of the many hats that I wear. And so I'm going to talk about K-State. I know I'm employed by KU, but we'll talk about K-State. So just think to yourself, what do you think a year of college at K-State costs in today's dollars? And we're talking tuition, fees, living on campus, personal expenses, travel expenses, basically the whole kit and caboodle. What do you think that cost is? Well, that cost is almost $30,000. And so if we bake in a 5% inflation rate over 4 years, and so your kid gets there in four, not five or six or whatever that looks like, but they get there in four, With a 5% increase, we're looking at about $125,000 to send one kid to school at a state school, which is supposed to be pretty affordable. So that's kind of shocking when you think about it. And many of you are probably on this call because you're trying to work through what that looks like. By the way, not only my kids, but you can see that my cat is making an appearance as well. So all right, so two main categories of student loans. You have your federal student loans, which these are the loans that would come from the FAFSA. We've talked about those, subsidized and unsubsidized. And then you have private student loans. These are loans that would come from a bank or credit union or financial institution. These don't come from the FAFSA, okay? So keep those two clear in your mind. And then again, mention that we have subsidized and unsubsidized loans that come from the FAFSA, depending on whether the government is going to pay for your interest while you're in school. So I'd mentioned that there's some caps on student loans when it comes to undergraduate students. And so you can see those caps here, and they really haven't changed in a very long time. So your undergraduate student, if they are a dependent student, and we'll talk about what that means as we get into the FAFSA, a dependent student will be capped at $5,500 in student loans their first year, $6,500 their second year, $7,500 for subsequent years, and they're actually fully capped at $31,000. So not going to be able to take out more than that. And really, if they're only going for 4 years, you've probably done the math. They actually also don't take out up to 35,000. So we'll actually have even a lower amount than that. So federal student loan types, another type that we're talking about and have talked about in previous slides are direct plus loans. So these are for graduate and professional students. Grad plus loans that's what they're called for graduate students, and then parent plus loans if you're taking it out on behalf of your student. For parent plus loans, they require a credit check, and it's not kind of a full credit check, but it is looking for adverse credit history. So parents do have to go through an additional vetting process, and they are higher interest rates. And for both of these categories, grad plus or parent plus, your only cap is kind of the cost of attendance and what you are gauged to be able to pay for college. So it can be a lot more. And again, I've worked with graduate and parent plus holders that have hundreds of thousands in debt that have gone to professional school or taken out debt on behalf of one or multiple children. So what are the interest rates now today on this debt? And I kind of mentioned previously that undergraduate borrowers get kind of preferred rates in terms of what they get from the government versus going out and trying to get a private student loan with no credit and no income history. And so you can see here for undergraduate borrowers, and by the way, these change every summer, and so they're tied to basically kind of a treasury interest rate. And so they change every summer. And this year, you're getting the rates that you see on the screen. So 5.5% for undergraduate borrowers. For graduate professional borrowers, it's 7.05%. And then for parent and graduate holders, we're looking at 8.05, so basically 8%. Now, what I do want you to know, though, and I put it in that last box, that last column there, is that there is a bigger fee for Parent Plus and Graduate Plus holders. And so you'll pay more in a fee taking out those loans than the other two previous ones are at about 1%, but you pay a little over 4% in a fee. So they're more expensive loans, essentially. So this higher interest rate is actually even kind of actually higher because of your higher fee. Okay, so that gives us all the background information that we need to start talking about the FAFSA. So there are some big changes to the FAFSA this year. You've probably heard of this thing called FAFSA simplification. And so that's the good piece of this. The FAFSA used to be over 100 questions long, and now you're going to have significantly less than that. So the FAFSA is markedly easier to fill out from this day going forward. And I say this day, but the FAFSA is actually going to open sometime in December for the first time. And so historically, the FAFSA has always opened October 1st for seniors going off to college. And so now you're going to have to wait a little bit longer. And the reason is because these changes are so drastic, the Department of Education is trying to keep up. And so they needed some more time to roll this out. So there's going to be fewer questions, but you're not going to have as much time to fill it out as you would have historically, or at least you won't be able to access the form in October. There are some other changes, and I have lots of bullet points here. You're more than welcome to watch the recording of this video, but you can see some of those outlines. So some of them are not so great. And so the net worth of businesses, for instance, used to be limited to those that only had more than 100 full-time employees. Well, that's, excuse me, no longer the case. And so now more people are going to have to start talking about the value of their business and have historically. Also, same with farms. We're going to see kind of a more encompassing question around that than we've seen in the past. For dependent students, one of the interesting changes that has come about is if a parent had an education savings account. So we're talking like 529s or maybe a Coverdell or whatever that looks like. But 529s is typically what it is. The value is required to be counted for all the students. So if you had one student in college but you had three others, then the value was kind of the entirety of that savings was counted. But now education savings accounts will only be counted as a parent asset if the account is for that designated student. So that's a positive change. There was a removal of a lot of the untaxed income questions, which are really confusing for a lot of families. And so we're not going to see those anymore. There's also the removal of the EFC. So you maybe heard of expected family contribution. The name of that is changing now to student aid index. And that calculation is different. Okay. There's some advantageous pieces of that, and there's some disadvantageous pieces of that. And so one of the penalizing pieces is that you're no longer going to split your EFC based on the number of kids in school, where it has historically. So, I'm a triplet, and my brother was only 3 years older than me. So you probably already figured it out. My parents had four kids in college at one time. Well, the EFC was split four ways. And so that was very beneficial for people to have multiple children in college, but that's no longer the case. And so that's certainly kind of a bummer when it comes to the new FAFSA. The FAFSA looks different though, because historically people have filled it out that maybe it wasn't designed for. So really the FAFSA was designed for the student to fill it out on their behalf. But guess what? If you have a senior, as many of you do on this call, a lot of times it's the parent filling out the form. And so it got pretty messy when it came to when did the parent log in and how did the parent log in and when does a student log in and what does it look like? And so now the Department of Education has kind of smartened up around this, and they've built a form that is a very seamless for all those use cases. So you're going to find, as many on this call are parents, that it's going to be easier for you to access and fill out the form. It's going to be a lot less confusing for you. So it is very modular in that respect. So now students, parents, and preparers can begin, complete, and submit a new FAFSA form, which again, in the past hasn't always been that easy to do it if you're not specifically the student. There's also the ability to list up to more colleges. So in the past, it was limited to 10. Now it's 20. You can log into the FAFSA through studentaid.gov by logging in. You can have access there. Hey, my son's running through again. So federal tax information, one of the coolest changes with the FAFSA is that federal tax information will be more automatically and seamlessly integrated into the form, whereas historically you had to use the IRS data retrieval tool, which wasn't always friendly to many borrowers. And again, we're going to replace EFC with SAI, so now that's what you'll hear going forward. And then you can correct and update your application like you have in the past. So those are some of the changes. There's a few more, but again, there's so many changes. I'm just trying to give you some highlights because many of you all are just going to want to see the form, right? And so that's where we're going to head next. All right, so I'm going to stop on this slide here. And by the way, the Department of Education has essentially published what the FAFSA will look like, which is really good for us, for those of us that want to see what it's going to look like before we go into it, which is why you're on this call. Now, there are many scenarios that we could go down, but the one that I've selected for this presentation is a dependent student inviting a parent to help them fill out the form. Okay, so what is a dependent student? Well, I want you to get out of your mind right now. Dependent does not mean dependent in terms of taxes. Okay. And this, by the way, none of this is tax advice anyway, but it's not a dependent in terms of taxes. Dependent is basically defined by the FAFSA qualifications for what it means to be a dependent. And if you're a dependent student in terms of the FAFSA and the questions that it asks you, and it does that through the form to gauge whether students dependent on their parents or not, essentially what happens is it will categorize your student as a dependent student, and then they have to report parent financial information. Now, after you get to a certain point in your career or in your life or in age, you eventually become an independent student. And so, one of the things that makes you an independent student is getting your bachelor's degree. And so, if a student gets their bachelor's degree, they go off to graduate school like me and a PhD. I no longer have to list my parents' financial information because I'm an independent student in terms of the FAFSA. But why do I explain all that to you? Well, most of you on this call, I've done this, I don't know for how many years. It's been probably 6 at least that I've done this presentation enough in Johnson County that the majority of you all are parents on this call. And so we are going to go with this dependent student scenario because that is what the majority of your senior students will be. And so that's the best use case for us to walk through the FAFSA. Okay, so here's the new FAFSA landing page. And so you can essentially, again, you could log in to studentaid.gov up here, which some of you all as parents will be familiar with because you can access your student loan information there. But you can log in and you can access the FAFSA that way. That's one thing that's changed. Or you can go to start a new form or edit an existing form. You see that right here, and that will get you to the FAFSA. Okay, so one other thing I want to point out is you'll see a naming convention here for the FAFSA. You'll see that here in the screenshot, it says 2024, 2025 FAFSA. Might be asking yourself, well, what does that mean? Okay, so the FAFSA is named after the year you are going to go to school. And so let's again think about a senior student. The senior is going to go through their last year of high school. They're going to graduate in May. And then come August, they're going to go off to college. That's typically the way that it works. And so in August, that would be August 2024. And then they're going to go through that entire year and they're going to come back home sometime in May of 2025. They're going to move back, take a job, whatever that looks like. And so you'll see that 2024 is when they're going to start college. 2025 is when they will exit that school year. That's the year that we're talking about in terms of the FAFSA. So again, you might be asking yourself, well, Jason, why are you explaining this in such depth? It's because in certain portions of the year, there are 2 FAFSAs that are open at any one given time. And so I can log in and do the FAFSA today. And that is the 2023-2024 FAFSA. And so that is really important because I've had families that have gone in and they have selected the 2023-2024 FAFSA, thinking that they're filling it out for their senior going to school in 2024-2025. And then you're going to wonder, where's my financial aid letter? And you're going to call the school and they're going to say, there's no FAFSA on file for you. Well, why? Because you filled out the wrong FAFSA. And so know that you need to enter the FAFSA for whenever you're going to go into school. And so for most of you that are filling it out on behalf of seniors, it's going to be 2024, 2025. So again, I know it's a long explanation, but it'll save you a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in making a mistake on that one. Okay, so then you're going to be able to log in. If you select start a new form from the landing page, you're going to get the opportunity to log in with your FSA ID. You might be asking yourself, well, what is an FSA ID? So this is the key to get into the FAFSA. And if you don't have one, which you will have one as you go through to renew your FAFSA form every year. But if this is your first time filling it out, you're going to have to set up an FSA ID. Parents, you may already have one if you have like a student loan account or you filled out your own FAFSA for yourself way back in the day. So you may have to reset your password. But for students, a lot of times they have to create an FSA ID from scratch. You can do that by selecting create an account here at the bottom. All right, then again, the FAFSA has gotten smarter in terms of trying to figure out who's filling it out and giving more of an opportunity for parents to take a role in the process. And so you're going to get to this new landing page which says, hey, I'm going to start a FAFSA as a student or as a parent. And you would select as a parent or as a student, whatever makes sense for you. New to the new FAFSA is also the onboarding process. And so now there's some kind of cool videos and instructions about what the FAFSA is about. This is something we haven't seen historically, but it will give you some more information right as you get into the form about what you're doing and how you need to fill it out. Then again, this idea that it's modular, it's going to give you some instructions on what to do if you're not the student, because you got to think the FAFSA is really created for students. It's federal student aid for college, and so we essentially have created, or the Department of Education has created the FAFSA to be a student form. But now it's getting more friendly for those that aren't. So basically, what needs to happen is if the student um, enters the form, they can now invite their parents to come and access the form. So they could invite parents or spouses, and it gives some directions on how they can do that and invite others to this process. Again, this is totally new to the new FAFSA. Then it says, hey, it's going to take you about an hour. It may not take you that long. I know I've certainly filled out a FAFSA in less than an hour, but that's essentially what it's saying. Then it's going to give you some information on what happens after you submit the FAFSA. Again, this information is totally new, but it's going to say it's going to be processed in 1 to 3 days. Typically, you get an email. The student gets an email saying your FAFSA is successfully processed. You can, at that point, log back in and view things like your student aid report. But that's giving you some more information about that. Then you're going to go to the first page. So this used to be split up into several sections, but essentially where we're at, to give you a sense of where we are, is student demographic information. So it's going to be collecting things like your mailing address and your name and social security number. You can see here that these are already pre-populated. They're not editable fields. And so once we get past this one, you can see that we can start editing things. This is the next question is about your permanent mailing address. And so permanent mailing address, city, state, zip code, and then what country you're in. You also have to select your state of legal residence. And the reason for this, one of the reasons for this, is that this has consequences as to in-state and out-of-state tuition. And so you might imagine if you go to KU or you go to K-State and you're a resident of Kansas, you're going to get a different tuition number than if you were coming here from California. And vice versa. If you go to a California school and you're a resident of Kansas, you're going to have to pay out-of-state tuition. So this whole idea of what's your state of legal residence is pretty important. And that's also why it's asking you to select how long you've been a resident, because a lot of times, whether you're a resident or not has a lot to do with how long you lived in the state. And so that's why it's gathering this information. It used to, if you're curious, had a question asking if you had been there for at least 5 years, but now it asks you to fill it out as an actual month and year. Okay, so now the dependent student is going to give consent for IRS information. And so if you filled this out historically, this is where you would have been at a place where you would have asked for, you would have given authorization for the IRS data retrieval tool. Well, now it's more seamlessly built in. And so you're giving consent for that information to come over, but no more IRS data retrieval tool. By the way, if you've ever filled out the previous FAFSA, you'll realize that we're missing a couple questions that should have come in the demographics section. Things like whether you've ever been convicted of a drug possession charge. And so there have been some questions that already, even this early in the form, have been cut from what we used to historically see. So again, still providing consent. This is as you're scrolling through that form for the student to provide consent. Then there are some situations where essentially there's kind of some specific, more nuanced circumstances. And so it's saying, hey, if you have dependents, you may have some special circumstances that affect your aid. And so this gives a student the opportunity to list some of those. And then we get to the place where we get a select marital status. By the way, now we're getting to the point where it's going to start asking questions about dependency status. And so you may not know that's where you're at in the form, but we're essentially getting to the point where we're asking the questions that will categorize a student as dependent or independent. And so if you're single, more likely to be dependent in many cases, unless you're going for a graduate degree. Whereas if you have dependents of your own, like you have children, then you're more likely to be independent in terms of the FAFSA. Then it's going to ask, and you can see it actually at this point gives us more of a roadmap at the top. So we'll see if the Department of Education kind of irons that out, because we haven't seen that previously. You used to see this roadmap at the top throughout the entire FAFSA process, but at least the screenshots are showing us that we're not going to be seeing that again. And so it's going to say, hey, after we talk about our married status, then we've been put to the point where we're asking about our level of school that we'll be in for the 2024-2025 school year. And again, I told you if you get your bachelor's degree, then if you go off to graduate school, you're going to be considered independent. And so that's a big piece of this question is whether we've already achieved a bachelor's degree and what level we're going in, because that helps us figure out dependency. Then there's special circumstances. And so these things may or may not apply to you, but they are nuanced ways that you might be dependent versus independent. Things like if you've ever been in the in the armed forces, if you've ever been in foster care or ward of the court or been emancipated, things like that. So these are more, I guess, not as common for many families, but you'll have to look through these and of course select none. Most will select none of these apply if you're a senior in college, that is. Okay, other circumstances, it's going to ask about whether you were homeless or not, which seems like kind of a strange question, but again, it's part of the dependency rules. And so you have to talk about whether you're homeless or you've been at risk of being homeless. And that's the next question. And then you talk about those unusual circumstances if they are a part of your situation. And so they might be, and part of this is because let's say you're a dependent student and you're supposed to report your parents' financial information, and one of those parents is abusive or violent. It's not going to be very conducive for you to engage that parent to try to get their financial information. And so over time, the department has figured out, hey, there are certain students that are going to have a really hard time reporting financial information for their parents. And if that's the case, the department wants to know about that so it can make accommodations for some of those things. And so that's what this is about, and it will essentially tell you what to do if one of these situations is something that you're up against. All right, so at this point, again, I told you that we've looked through a lot of those rules, and so the FAFSA behind the scenes has been categorizing you or your student as dependent or independent in terms of FAFSA. And so you can see here we're going through the dependent kind of categories because I think that's the best use case for this presentation. And so in this case, that screen shows up and it says, hey, you're dependent in terms of the FAFSA, and this is what that means. And we essentially want to gather your parents' financial information. And so it's going to say, hey, can you report that information? And so some students can't, and maybe they're only going to be eligible for certain things because of that, but most are going to give financial information for their parents. So naturally, the next place that we go in terms of the FAFSA is starting to talk about those parents. So it's going to say how long have your parents been married or are they married? And that's going to give some additional information as to what that looks like. Because again, we have some families that are out there that have married parents, some that are divorced, some that are single family households. And so it's going to ask the married question to kind of start to categorize how you're going to have to fill out the FAFSA. And so now we're going to get to a place where your student's going to hit a page where they can provide information for the parents or invite their parents to come and fill out this form. So information about both the parents here, selecting continue. Then we get to student demographics. And so again, more information in terms of the student. And this is, we've already filled out some of the demographics, but now we're going a little bit deeper. So we're going to talk about gender. This is a new question about the transgender that's never been on a form before, but we're seeing it in this year. Then we have about kind of your racial or racial and origin type questions that are here. And you'll see that it also says at the top that these questions are for research purposes, and so this won't affect your financial aid. So you'll talk about your race and origin status, then also citizenship status. And this one does limit if you're not a US citizen or an eligible non-citizen, then you would be in a place where this could potentially affect your ability to get financial aid. But if you're a US citizen, That's certainly what financial aid is designed to cater to in terms of the law here in the United States. It doesn't mean you can't get it if you're not a US citizen, but that's why it asks this question, because it categorizes you as to your eligibility for financial aid at this point. It's going to also ask about parent education status. And I believe this one too, it doesn't say it at the top, but I believe this one is just for research purposes as well. Then this is a newer question. I don't think we've seen this one in the past either, where it talks about a parent killed in the line of duty. And I believe that this one goes to some of those grants that I showed you earlier. There's one in particular that is pertaining to a parent being killed in the line of duty. So I think that's why this question was added. Not totally sure about that, but that's my hunch. Then it's going to talk about high school completion status. So you're going to talk about whether you got a diploma, a GED, homeschool, or none of the above. You'll move on to selecting that high school, if you selected high school, that is. And then you're going to confirm that high school once you look it up in the database. Then it's going to talk finances. And so now, again, we have the opportunity to, well, essentially, you could pull some of this information from your tax return, but certainly if you've pulled some of this through consent, I'm guessing, which it doesn't show these in the screenshots, but a lot of these will be grayed out because your information has been imported. That's the way it's happened historically with the IRS data retrieval tool. I would anticipate that that will continue to work with the new system. But other than that, again, a lot of those untaxed income questions have gone away, thank goodness. But you're still going to have to answer some questions about benefits and scholarships. And then you will have to report assets and net worth of business and net worth of real estate, farms, things like that. So again, these questions are similar to what we've seen in the past. But they are a little bit different in some of the changes that we had talked about earlier. By the way, one of the cool things about the FAFSA, this is a smart form, and essentially the financial aid calculations that go on behind the scenes as you're filling out the FAFSA have gotten more generous in terms of whether you need to report your assets. And so the old FAFSA, if you didn't hit a certain threshold, would actually say it would kind of fill out this section for you, and it'd say, hey, you can just continue without filling it out. So we'll likely see more of that going into the future, where it will automatically calculate in the background and maybe give you a pass on answering some of these questions. Again, I haven't been in the forum because it's not published yet, but I would anticipate that that same functionality will hold. Okay, so we've talked about finances. And now we're going to go into selecting those colleges. And so what happens is FAFSA has a database where you go through and select colleges that you want to attend or that your student wants to attend. And so you will find all those different colleges, select them in the database, and add them to your list within the FAFSA. So let me tell you, once you submit the FAFSA, what happens is these schools that you designate in the form will, when your FAFSA processes and it says, hey, congratulations, your FAFSA has been processed, and you get that email, your financial information is sent to the schools on your list. So now you can list up to 20, but that's what happens is you're essentially designated the schools that you want to get this information. Now, a lot of families ask me at this point, hey, should I select the FAFSA or should I list schools that we may or may not apply to? My student maybe wants to go, but they're not really sure. Well, yeah, list it on the FAFSA. The worst that can happen is that school is going to receive your information. It's going to sit in the file, and then you're never going to fill out an application. So eventually, I'm sure after whatever the retention records are, they're going to shred that form and all is good. And so unless you just are opposed to your information being sent to a school, there's no reason, especially to delay filling out the FAFSA just because you don't have a solidified school list. So keep that in mind. All right, so your student is going to select these schools. They can now do up to 20. They're going to add them to the list. Okay, so now it's going to say you've gone through all this information. Thank you for filling out your personal and demographic information, your financials, and selecting your colleges. And then now you're to the point where you can sign. And again, this is just the student filling this stuff out because now the FAFSA is modular. And so parents can go in and fill out their own information after they've been invited. And so you can see that the student didn't get prompted with a parent section at this point because it's modular and it's just designed for the student, which is pretty cool on the dependency side, if you're dependent. And so now it's going to say, hey, you've got to share you've got some additional information to fill out. So we do have some contributors that need to get the information, i.e. your parents that need to fill these things out. And so it's going to say, hey, you sent an invite to your parents so they can click on that link and come in and fill out the FAFSA or the section of the FAFSA that they need to fill out. Now it's saying, hey, you filled out your section, it's complete. So now you can go on to signing and completing your part. And then you will sign and it's going to say you're almost there. And this is again where it's different than the old FAFSA because it's saying, hey, congrats, it's done. But if you look at this summary page, it's not saying the FAFSA is done. It's saying your part is done, i.e. the student section. It's still saying that there are a couple other sections that need to be filled out. The invite has been sent, but before your FAFSA will be complete and to be processed, it needs to have the parent information. And so again, if you were an independent student, likely at this stage, it would say your FAFSA is complete because you don't have parent information to fill out. But in this case, an independent student, you certainly do. Okay, then it's going to give you some additional information on the FAFSA and the process and eligibility for financial aid. And then you're going to eventually get well, at the same time, your parent's going to get that invite email. And this is what it looks like. I'm really glad the Department of Education gave us this screenshot because this is what it should look like. And it's kind of in a mobile form, which is pretty cool too. So if you pull it up on your phone, the email will look like this. And it says, hey, help complete Jason's form. And it's going to say, hey, Jason's mom, whatever your name is going to say, your student has invited you to the FAFSA. Click on this link to log in. So you're going to click on the link and it's going to take you to your own login page where you, of course, need an FSA ID. So the student does need that, or the parent needs one as well. And it's going to take you to essentially your dashboard that you can start filling out this information on behalf of your student. And you can see here, it's given a screenshot with borrower's defense and PSLF applications. These are student loan things. So I guess it's just landing you at a page. Again, the FAFSA is new. I'm seeing these screenshots as you are, but it's essentially putting you to a place where it says my activity. And so you're probably not going to see things like this. I think they just did that as an example. So now you'll log in to complete the FAFSA. It's going to give you some FAQ sections. It's also going to give you that video. And then it's going to say, hey, you need contributors. How can you invite, etc. So you're going to have parent onboarding as well, which is what they're calling it. And then it's going to say, what do you expect? It should take you about an hour. Again, it's my experience that it won't take you that long. And then, sorry, I think I missed one after submitting the form as well. So it's all those similar screens you saw on the student side. So then it's going to say, again, you're going to have to fill out your demographic information just like your student did. And so this, at least according to the screenshot, it looks like it's going to be filled in for you. These won't be editable fields, but you're going to have to fill out your address, your permanent address. And then it's going to put you to a screen where you have to approve the IRS import of your data. Again, no IRS data retrieval tool, but it's kind of doing the same function behind the scenes here. So you'll have to go through and approve your financial information to be imported. And by the way, I didn't mention this, and again, I haven't been in the form yet, but I assume that you will have the opportunity, and it says it right here, to decline. So you might be asking yourself, hey, I don't want to use this tool to import my information. What happens then? Well, you're going to have to manually put in your information from your tax return. And so again, neither here nor there. If you don't trust the system to import it for you, that's totally fine. You're just going to have a little more legwork in terms of what you're going to have to fill out. All right, then it's going to give you some information. It's going to ask you for information about yourself. So demographics, you're going to have to select your marital status. You're going to have to select your state of residence and how long you've been there, similar to what your student did. Then it's going to ask you some information about your finances. And so here it's going to ask about any benefits that you received, things like the earned income tax credit or your Medicaid, if you do Medicaid. And we saw these in other portions of the form, I believe, in previous iterations, but whether you receive SNAP assistance, all of these things. And so it may be none of these apply. These are still some of the unearned income tax questions, but we just don't have as many as we've had historically. So you would select any of these that have been essentially something that you've received, either through your tax return or through some kind of social welfare type program. Then you're going to talk about your tax filing status. So if you're married, did you file jointly with your spouse? And so you would say, yes, I have, or no, I didn't. You'd move on. And then it's going to say, is your family size different from the ones that you claimed on your tax return? And so you would say yes or no. And then it's going to give you a family size. And then you'd enter the number of children that are going essentially that receive more than half of your support from you at this point. Then you're going to tell the department how many of those children are going to be in college for the 2024-2025 school year. And so you would include that here. And again, it says do not include the parents. So if you're going to school yourself, you would not select yourself as one of, or you would not include yourself as within this number, whatever you're putting there. Okay, so now we're getting to tax return information. Again, receiving earned income tax credit, you would say yes, no, or don't know. Then you're going to select how many, or you're going to put in how many scholarships you have, or things like grants, AmeriCorps benefits. Again, these are kind of the unearned income tax questions that have stuck around from the previous form. You're going to talk about annual child support, and then you're going to answer information about your assets. And by the way, when it comes to asset questions, so there are some financial questions on the FAFSA that are importing historical tax information. So it's importing directly from the IRS, or you're entering it yourself from your tax returns. And I haven't seen this change. I haven't seen anything saying that this is going to change going into the future. So historically, that has been 2 tax years prior. So if we're talking 2024, 2025 FAFSA, you'd be using 2022 tax return information. And so that's historical information. A lot of things have probably changed in 2 years since 2022. However, when we're talking about assets that you have in your cash, savings, or checking accounts, literally the Department of Education wants to know as of today. And it looks like I'm looking at the form here. It looks like they've changed some of the wording, but it used to say as of today, what is your balance in cash, checking, savings accounts? And so you're essentially going to log into your bank accounts. You're going to add up that number and you're going to put it here on this line. Then it's going to say what's the net worth of your business or investment farms. And so again, this is where we used to have, we've had historically that 100-person cap, which most people don't have a 100-person business, right? But now this is a more inclusive number. You're going to have to put some type of valuation on your business or your family farm. And then you have net worth of investments, including real estate. Now, at this point, historically, when I do this presentation, I would give you a list of what's included in investments and what's not. I haven't seen that guidance published, and so I'm not going to do that at this time. But essentially what happens is a lot of times, and when this form has been created, that there is a little helper icon, and I don't see it on the screenshots. So we'll see if it's included by the time they release the FAFSA form. I hope it is. If it's not, feel free to reach out to me. I can probably find the guidance and direct you to it. But what's happened in the past is there's been a little helper icon here. You can click on it and it will tell you what's included and what's not included in terms of investments for the FAFSA. So again, I wish this year I could show that to you in a table like I've done in the past, but the guidance hasn't been published. And so I don't feel comfortable making assumptions at this time. But I know on this call in particular, lots of people ask me about, hey, how do I value my business? How do I value farm? What's included in investments and what's not? I don't have that guidance yet because again, the department is kind of running behind on some of this. So I know what last year was, but I don't know what this year was. So anyway, I'm not going to be as helpful this year as I was previously, but that's why I'm not providing that slide this time around. Hopefully next year, all that'll be solidified and I can give you some more information. Then you have parents' other information. So this is the other parent. And as you might imagine, we're going to go through kind of the same thing. And so the other parent is going to keep going through. Then we will essentially have kind of these summary forms, just like what we saw, saying that you've completed these sections. And then eventually you will get to a place where you will sign as a parent as well. And so you can sign and complete, and then you will have congratulations. And guess what? This time it says your form is complete. Why? Because you have filled out the parent information. Okay, the other thing that's very interesting this year is that parents have the ability to start and submit the FAFSA without the consent or signature of a student. And so this is something you haven't been able to do in the past. And I, again, haven't been in the form. So I have the screenshots here to show you, but I've never walked through it in real time. I will, I'm sure, in the future. But I'm going to show you what this looks like because this hasn't been an option in the past. So it's kind of exciting and interesting. And so this is the main FAFSA landing page again. You can start or enter a new form. And then we'll see that when you log in with your FSA ID, you can now select, instead of selecting a student, you select the parent. And then it's going to ask you to fill out the student's information. And so you'll do that. You'll do their, mailing address and all of that good stuff. You're going to have kind of the same onboarding screenshots that we've seen before. The student information will be blocked out, but then you'll have some editable pieces that we've seen, the student's state of legal residence. Then we go to personal circumstances, student's married status. Again, we've seen all these, which is why I'm going quickly. When they're going to enter in school, any personal circumstances, and none if any of those don't apply, you would select none of these apply. Other student circumstances, this is the homeless question. Unusual circumstances, you would select that. So essentially, you're filling out the form on behalf of the student, which again has been the use case of the FAFSA for many years. We've never ever had a mechanism where parents can do it without kind of like, a very confusing process that wasn't very seamless. And so it's going to say we have to figure out dependency status, and then you get to parent information. And so same thing here, information on your dependency status, and importing tax information, parent demographics. We've seen all this, whether you're married or not, state of legal residence, finances. So all of these questions we just went over. We don't have to go through those in sequence again, but all of these are the same. So you're going to fill out the same parent information, but the difference is this time you're filling out some things on behalf of your student. And then eventually we get to a parent review page where you can sign. And so parent information is complete, and you can see the screenshot's actually not currently available. So this tells you these are the slides from the Department of Education. The Department of Education is still doing this in real time, even as these screenshots were published, which again is why the FAFSA is going to open up in December. Okay, so trying to think if there's anything new that we need to see here. You've seen all of these. Parent killed in the line of duty, high school completion status. You've already seen all of these screenshots confirming the high school, parent financials. It's going to ask at this point, this looks like it looks to be a new question. It's going to ask about the student's tax filing status, but it's the parent filling it out. So you'd have to select that. There's no screenshots available, but this is likely going to be that consent where it might look a little bit different since you're consenting on behalf of the student. That's probably why the screenshot is not available, but it's going to be pretty similar to what you've seen, I'm sure, as the previous slides, consenting that IRS tax information gets imported in. You're going to answer some information about student assets. So how much do they have in checking accounts? Do they own a business? Do they have any investments? And then selecting colleges and adding colleges to the list. So again, we've seen all of this before. The parents are selecting on behalf of the student here. And then the review page. So you can see at this point, we're getting to the point where we can actually sign the FAFSA. Okay. All right. So FAFSA submission. So here is the summary when your FAFSA is complete. Again, this looks a little bit different than it has in the past. And so you do have a summary page that is kind of a landing page. Oh, all right. Somebody got off mute there. Then it is going to give some eligibility information, which is kind of interesting as well. So it's going to say this is what you're eligible to take out in terms of federal Pell Grant, or direct loans. And so it may give you kind of an insider understanding of what you might get when your financial aid letter comes down from your school and we can talk about that if there are any questions about that. I'm happy to go through that process. But essentially what happens is you're going to submit your FAFSA. I've already mentioned that the schools that are on your list will get your financial information. And then after that occurs, those schools get to work putting together a financial aid package as long as you've went through their process and got admitted, done everything that they need for you to be eligible for financial aid at that specific school. And a lot of times, all those steps are outlined on the admissions and financial aid websites of the school. So once you've done all that, what will happen is they're going to take all this information, they're going to put everything that you're eligible for in terms of financial aid from the government, also financial aid from the school. They're going to package that together in something called a financial aid letter. They're going to send that to you for a senior, a typical senior that's going off to school in August. You'll probably receive it sometime between January and May. And that's really the only time you know what a school is going to cost, because those letters typically, and they all vary a little bit, they typically say, this is what the school costs. Here's the full cost of attendance. Here's all the aid that you've been given. And then here's the gap. Here's what we're not going to cover with financial aid. And then you have an understanding, okay, that's probably what I'm going to have to pay year to year in order for my student to go to school. Also going to list your student aid index, which, by the way, for the first time, if you demonstrate a significant need, you can actually have a negative student aid index, which is what you're seeing here on the screenshot. That wasn't possible with EFC. You could only get a 0. But here you can get, this year, you can get up to a negative 1,500 SAI if you demonstrate pretty significant financial need. Okay. And that is, oh, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Oh, by the way, you probably saw very briefly, this is that investment slide that I've shown in the past. Again, I can't show that to you this year because I don't have the guidance. So please don't take this as the golden standard for the coming FAFSA. But this is what I used to be able to do in the past, is put it all in a nice little table for you. But I don't have the guidance for this year. So please ignore that. I just wanted to address it quickly as we go along. All right, so FAFSA form answers. Again, school information, it gives you some information about each of the schools in terms of statistics. And then it's going to give you next steps, which explain kind of what I've already explained to you in this presentation about what happens with your financial information and where it goes and what your next steps are. And then it gives you a little bit about more financial resources if you'd like to see that as well. Okay, so now I'm going to give you some additional resources as you go along. We're at the end of our presentation here. So the first is you're welcome to visit my website, gradmetrics.com. I do have blog posts regularly on college and student loan planning topics. So that's always a great place to check out if you want some college information. By the way, I have lots of free, very useful information about how to do things like search for college or get financial aid or pick the right school. So I would encourage you to look at that. I also have a podcast. I don't update it frequently because, of course, I have a full-time job in academia. But I do have a lot of really good information on there if you want to check that out. And then finally, my contact information. I've done this presentation enough times to know that many families reach out. And by the way, I've done this a lot of times. I'm looking at my time that I've been, and I hit exactly 1 hour. Okay, so maybe that tells me that I've been doing this for too long, that I've timed this to exactly 1 hour after all these years. But anyway, you're more than welcome to reach out to me, Jason at gradmetrics.com. You can call or text that number, 816-601-2002. More than happy to answer questions. And I'm sure I'm going to answer quite a few as we finish up this presentation. And I'm going to turn it back over to Dylan.
Thank you so much, Jason. I really appreciate it. And everybody, feel free to flood the chat with your thanks to Jason as well. I was thinking the exact same thing. I was like, boy, he is just right on it. And as always, that is totally the case once again. So we will get into our questions. However, we don't have to record those because sometimes this can be kind of a free-flowing conversation. But for the most part, I've received a lot of great questions, and so we will address those once again as I receive them. Lots of times, there are questions that come in that Jason eventually does cover. So we'll be repeating some of the information as well. But regardless, I'll go ahead and wrap up the official library portion of all of this, and then we can go ahead and get into the questions. So Jason, again, thank you for your presentation. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Our next career and finance program will cover the topic of retirement planning. This online program will take place next Tuesday, 6:30, next Tuesday, October 3rd. Visit jocolibrary.org and click on the Career and Finance feature on the homepage to discover upcoming events, sign up for our monthly Career and Finance e-newsletter. It's actually bi-monthly now, or find additional career and finance resources. Also, be sure to check out the library's library of program recordings, which can be found either at either through our website on the career and finance page or youtube.com/joco library. Thank you all once again and have a great evening.